Welcome to Wine Country at Work. I'm Ralph Demetrius, your host. I want to introduce you to a very interesting person today. This is Dave Thompson, and he is the director and creator of the NapaWineProject.com. Now, he's especially dear to me because, together with my wife Lonnie, I'm a wine tour guide and a wine tour author. I write wine tour books and travel books. Well, the thing about wine country and wineries is that these are all commercial ventures. It's not like some type of government organization where everyone has to line up and tell you what they're doing. No, these are a bunch of entrepreneurs, either families or big companies, and they decide what they're going to do and what they're going to change and when they're going to change it, and they do it entirely independently of anybody else except maybe a little bit from the county regulators. There's certain things they have to depend upon the ABC organization and the county legislators to do, but pretty much everything else is up to them, taking weather into account because it's farm country and everything relates to the weather. Keeping track of all this when you're doing a wine tour directory for a county as big as Napa or Sonoma, two of the two top wine tour destinations in the world, is not easy. It's an endless challenge of updating. We've been doing books for 14 years now, and I was going to say 14 books. It's only 10 books actually, and about every couple of years we have to update, and it's a challenge. Well, David, really as a passion rather than even a business venture, a number of years ago started working on researching the wineries of Napa. Now, Napa is unique in that it's very small. It's a small little valley. It's 30 miles long, 5 miles wide, at the widest point. But it has the most expensive wines in America. And it also has some of the best growing conditions in the world. So it's right up there with all the other great producers, the Margaret River or Bordeaux, when it comes to growing the Cabernet Sauvignon, the big boy of wines, the most expensive commercial grape. And he, over these years, for about 14, 15, 16 years now, has been visiting wineries and documenting them. Now, fortunately, he is a travel writer. He has a whole other website that he does, and that relates to travel internationally and travels extensively. But this is his personal passion. And what I think is fun is that he's not from Napa. He's actually from Santa Rosa over in Sonoma, the next town, next county over, but he's focused on Napa. And he's done an amazing project here. He's documented well over 1,000 wineries in great detail, including many wineries that people don't really go to. They're not open to the public, but he was able to get himself in the door. He writes about them, he tastes the wine, he talks with the owners or the winemaker, he does audios sometimes, he takes photos. And when we were doing our first wine tour book, we would periodically run into situations where we had to include a winery in the directory that we had never been to. Between our big book, we call it, Dream Tours, we have about 500-600 wineries in there that you can visit. But every now and then there's wineries you haven't been to. And you go to the company website and they tell you what they want you to know. And the photos may or may not actually reflect what the place is really like because photographers can be very tricky. But how do you get an honest description of this? Well, I actually met David one day when we were both at a tasting room. I think it was at Maçonnerie early on when it had opened up in Yountville. And he was there tasting, and I was there doing research for my book, and we ended up chatting and meeting and getting to know each other a little bit. And when I would get stuck looking for wineries to put in the directory where I had all my other information but I wanted the true story, I would go to Wine Project, NapaWineProject.com, and David would give me the information I needed. So I hope you enjoy meeting him and learning about how the project came together, and enjoy. describe the project. That's my
Sure.
easiest thing to do.
So in late 2006, I began writing an article for my travel website, Dave's Travel Corner, about the wines of Napa Valley. And I wasn't really focusing on the wines at that time. I was walking into tasting rooms and just writing about the experience or the architecture, anything someone would experience just by walking into one of the larger wineries in Napa Valley. The larger wineries then referred me to more mid-sized wineries, who then in turn referred me to the really tiny boutique producers that you can't find on the general maps often. And it just became, it turned into a project. I never intended to try to visit, taste, and write about every single winery, brand, or producer, or tasting room in Napa Valley. But that has been what the project has morphed into over the last 14 years. I'm now at 999 Napa wineries, producers, brands, or standalone tasting rooms that offer tasting experiences, visited, tasted, and reviewed. And throughout the project, I've tried to become a sponge, absorb as much information as I possibly can about this amazing valley, about its vintners, about its history, its stories, viticulture, the winemaking. I've made wine for a small producer where we are now, Tedeschi Family Vineyards up in Calistoga. Helped the owner Emil make wine for several years, and took some wine classes from wineries here in the valley, and just try to learn as much as I possibly can. But I've been working on this long enough that I now know a lot of people in the valley, and if there's a difficult producer to gain access to, eventually I will meet someone who knows the owners or has some connection, or maybe even makes wine at that particular winery or producer. The Napa vintners have been very helpful. They've helped me out initially and continuing to provide help with getting into properties. So I'm at basically 1,000, almost 1,000, but what's remarkable is I still have several hundred more to visit. So there's around 500 physical wineries in the valley, and then of the 1,000 I visited, the others are producers. So they make wine at another winery. They don't actually own the physical winery, and they may or may not own the vineyards. So I call them producers or brands. They're still making wine commercially in Napa from Napa grapes. So I try to dig deep. I try to partake in numerous experiences at a large winery. So if it's Robert Mondavi Winery, they offer a bicycle tour of Tokelon, I will go to that. Or they have their summer concert series, I'll go to that and experience that and take photography and write about it. They have their general tour, they have a more extended tour. They have the reserve tasting, they have the regular tasting, just as an example. And so I'll dig deep, and over the years I've done hundreds and hundreds of revisits to these wineries to stay current and to update my reviews and to make sure that I'm getting the information I can from the winery.
Dave, wait a second. There's a bicycle tour at the Tokelon Vineyards?
Yes, I believe they started it in 2018, and I was just at Mondavi, and they're continuing that this year as well. It's a fantastic tour. It's 2 hours, and you get to visit the historic H block, the monastery block. I mean, these are the monastery block Cabernet, some of the oldest Cabernet in Napa Valley, some of the oldest Sauvignon Blanc in the country, and you're tasting wine among these ancient vineyard site blocks in the vineyard, and just, yeah, it's a really cool tour. I have favorites, and so there's sort of a formula that I'll follow for that. And this is generalized.
Right.
I tend to gravitate toward hillside properties, historical properties, the owner's personality, the pedigree of the site, the pedigree of the vineyard, of course, architecture, views, those are all bonuses. And I'm also looking for a little bit of exclusivity. Doesn't need to be like you can never get into that winery, but a little exclusivity is a nice factor. Make the client feel like they're in a special place, which they are. Kongsgaard is a fantastic property, and unfortunately they don't see visitors up there, but it's one of the highest vineyards in Napa Valley. His family's been in the valley since the 1840s. Some of his wines take a year plus to fully ferment. He's got all the aspects of the formula. Dalaval is another amazing property with amazing wines. I've always enjoyed their wines. Again, don't see visitors. Constant, top of Diamond Mountain, they do see visitors by appointment.
Just takes a while to get there.
It does. It's a long, windy road. And fantastic views with architecture and infinity pools, and just the quintessential day up there is when the valley's covered in fog and you're up at 2,000 feet not quite 2,000 feet, and it's an inversion layer, so it's warmer up there, and you're looking down on the sea of white with Mount St. Helena poking above the fog in the distance. Other properties, Marston family up on Spring Mountain, 400 plus acres up there, where Clark Gable had his honeymoon, one of his honeymoons. Yeah, so, but there's some amazing properties on the valley floor as well. But
it's interesting.
Correct, and I also love visiting some of the producers that don't do tastings, but because I'm trade, it's okay. I can get in and for my project. So we'll taste at their house, we'll taste at their vineyard. I've tasted at some interesting locations in the valley. Some of the characters, I've done a characters tour before. Those on the tour don't know that they're on the characters tour. But these are people that may not speak, they're very quiet, or they're just maybe prolific with swearing. I mean, there's so many different.
they're not in the hospitality side of it.
Yes, but that makes it unique and a fun visit too for clients.
In terms of how tastings have evolved, I've been noticing that more and more they want to create the experience.
Yes.
They're not interested in just pouring the wine anymore. They want to combine the food with it. They want to tell you the whole story. What have you been seeing?
I have definitely been seeing that. Less visits in a day and more time spent at a winery, more of a sit down, more of an experience, curated experience. There's been a number of trends that I've noticed since I've been working on my project. Start with downtown Napa. So I think when I started in '06, there was just 2 or 3 tasting rooms down there, and now I have a list of over 40, and they still are opening. There's certainly been some transition and change in ownership in some of those, but it's exploded, if you will. And part of that ties in, businesses are now confident that the downtown will no longer flood.
Right.
And so we've had new hotels, beautiful new hotels, the Andaz a few years back, and then the Archer more recently, and world-class restaurants now. And so it's become a place where you don't just drive by on 29 on the highway. There's a reason to stay in downtown, and there's a reason to taste and eat in downtown Napa.
Right. Well, hard.
Yeah, and we also seen that with some of the smaller towns up valley, with Calistoga and St. Helena to a lesser extent, definitely Yountville. As far as tasting rooms.
Look at downtown Healdsburg.
Yeah, yes, or downtown Sonoma.
Right, yes.
Nearby neighbors. And I think we've seen a trend to more appointment-only properties. And even the properties that used to see visitors by walk-in have now gone appointment-only, some of the smaller. They're trying to create a better experience for their guests.
I wonder how much it's that, and also how much, they don't make a lot of wine.
True.
Their wine clubs are taking 80-90% of their wine.
True.
They don't want to spend that much on staff.
True. And they can, and often the smaller producers, the really small producers, they'll host themselves, the winery, the owner or the winemaker.
Which is always nice.
And that's a fun experience.
Yeah.
There's different levels when you start talking hospitality versus the ownership, the passion, the obsession sometimes versus the owner. So it's always a nice experience to taste with the owner or the winemaker.
Yeah, it's funny. There's different kind of categories of owners. You have the old families that have been here forever. I mean,
sure.
we're here at Tedeschi.
Correct.
And how long has this family been?
They've been in the valley since 1919, so old for Napa.
Old for Napa. Well, the whole region was only settled 1830s, 1840s,
Correct.
really.
Yeah. The first vineyard site, Napa Wine Co., the Hoxie family down in Yountville, where the George Yount's blockhouse was.
Right, yeah.
Dates from well, it's no longer there, but that's the original site, dates from the late 1830s.
Yeah.
Of course, Charles Krug is the oldest winery in the valley, although there was Patchett Winery in downtown Napa. It was 1858 approximately, and they didn't last very long. So Krug has that. Oldest family-owned, continuously operated winery in the valley is Nicolini.
Yes.
Behringer's the oldest vintage winery since 1870.
In terms of running continuously.
Continuously, correct.
No,
not family-owned anymore,
they went
of
right
course.
through Prohibition too.
Right, even though Mark Behringer is their winemaker now, but
right.
Yeah, so those are, you always have to clarify when you're talking the oldest.
Well, there's, there must be like 5 or 6 oldest, I'm sure.
Yeah, that are still different owners, they've gone through different transitions. Edge Hill, any winery that dates from the 1860s in this valley is on a very short list, or early 1870s, but 1860s really. Edge Hill, Schramsberg, David Fulton. And as part of this project, I travel outside of Napa quite often to any wineries, spaces, restaurants, tasting rooms that have a very, very strong connection to the Napa Valley. So I just returned from Willamette Valley yesterday, visiting 6 wineries. I was basically doing Napa Valley and the Willamette. So Fela and Soter and Archery Summit, Crimson Wine Group, and Francis Ford Coppola just bought Domaine Broly.
Heard about that.
And a couple of others as well. So I think, yeah, so I'll go around the state, I'll go around the country, and I do international as well, focusing just on Napa. So next month I'm going to Europe and visiting a number of wineries that have very strong connections to Napa Valley. I'm starting in Ireland with Chase Family Cellars because their family history ties back to Ireland's first national park, the Bourne family. And then over to France, of course, because there's a lot in Champagne,
Yes.
tied in with some of the wineries here in the valley. And then Spain, Priorat, Alpha Omega, and Cliff Lady just bought into a winery over there. And then Cordonu, Artesa.
Of course.
And then Gargich, I haven't been there yet, so
Yes.
gonna see Gargich, his winery.
Yes.
But and a few others. And these are ongoing trips. I mean, I can't do it all at one time, so
No, of
I
course not.
make other trips as well.
Yeah.
So back to the Appalachian or the sub-AVA or the AVAs. So there's 16 in the valley, 17 if you count Napa as a whole. There's some ones that really stand out for me. I love Howell Mountain. I love the elevation, and I love the way things smell up there. It reminds me of the Sierra Nevadas at about 2,000 feet, an
Yeah.
equivalent elevation, similar vegetation,
Good description.
and the wine's up there as well. It's taken me a long time to come around to Mount Veeder, but I have. It's just a very rugged appellation with very few vineyards compared to the other appellations. And it's also home to some of the characters that I know in the valley. Very well educated, very well-rounded people, but they value their privacy in some cases. Veeder as well.
It's very heavily wooded.
Yeah,
And
very
there's-
heavily wooded,
and there's
very
so many-
steep, and not a lot of
A lot
vineyards.
of crevices.
Yeah, rocky and some of the
Different
some of the highest vineyards in the valley. Lamperidae is up about 2,500 feet.
Really?
Yes. So the highest vineyards in the valley, I think, Lamperidae on Veeder, a little over 25. Black Sears, their highest vine is about 2,500 on Howell Mountain, and then Gerard sources Zinfandel from, I think it's Blue. I can't. The last name's escaping me. Blue something vineyard. It's on the Solano-Napa County line, and that's the highest they've told me at like 2,600 plus feet.
That's pretty rarefied.
That is, yeah. When you're getting that high in the valley, that's pretty high. We're not Argentina. We're not Mendoza.
No.
Oakville, Pritchard Hill's not an AVA, but just that whole area through there, Rutherford, St. Helena. Some of the choicest cab is coming from the benchlands in those AVAs. There's 2 AVAs that cross county lines. One is the obscure Wild Horse Valley.
Right.
No one really talks about that, but there are vineyards up there.
Well, it's
There's a
hard to
winery
get.
on the Solano side up there as
It's
well.
just hard to get there.
And it's hard to get there, and there's gates.
Right.
And then, of course, Carneros.
Right.
Napa and Sonoma is the much more well-known one. But just the geology and just the climate in this valley is pretty impressive. Just in such a small region, the temperature can change dramatically where you are. I mean, it's in the diurnal day, between night and day, you can have 40, 50 degree temperatures.
That's what grapes like.
That's conducive for acid, and
Makes the
it's
great
not
wines.
all sugar.
Yeah, it makes all the great wines.
And so that also determines what you plant where in this valley. And it's taken a while, decades to figure that out in some cases, and with phylloxera, that's also accelerated some of that. And I love, that gave us a chance to reset in different row orientation, different trellising, different varietals, different clones, different rootstocks. It was also a time where it was very expensive and people had to get out of the industry because you lose your whole vineyard.
Oh, yes.
I,
Well, that's when there was the big corporate takeovers.
And that too. Yeah, there is. I would still say, if you look at numbers, the majority of Napa is small, family-owned, private. The ownership or the leasing, in many cases, is big from the corporate wineries. But if you just look at numbers, a lot of this valley is still
It's
very much.
small family wineries.
Yeah.
Small family vineyards.
Just other random facts. In the late 70s, I have a list of around 40 wineries that were in business then, who are still in business now. There was more, of course. Some have gone away. And now we're over 500 physical and
Right.
1,200 brands, producers at least,
Right.
unique producers, ownership.
I heard this great interesting statistic. In 2000, only 15% of the grapes were actually made into wine in the county, And as of like last year, it was 150%. We have so many vineyards and winery facilities now that grapes are shipped in here.
Oh yes, that is the
That's
other
the
thing. I
guy.
have to be very careful on my project. I need to really identify who is a Napa winery and who is not a Napa winery. So I follow the Napa vintners in that. You need 50 cases from Napa, a certain period of time selling the wine in, and it must be grown and made in Napa.
Right.
So you can actually have a million cases outside of Napa, but as long as you have that small production in Napa, you're considered technically. Those are, I tend to prioritize, so they tend to be lower priority when I'm reaching out to new producers to taste with.
The classic case of that, of course, is Pride,
Yeah, that's a great case.
because they span the county line.
Right, they got double taxes, 2 taxes from 2 different counties.
Yeah, 2 permits.
Part of their cave is on one side, part on the other. Views on one side, views on the other. Yeah, I love Pride.
And they're very careful not to make sure the wine stays on the
Correct.
side where it's made.
Correct, exactly. I do want to mention, just a shout out to the Historical Vineyard Society, because I've always been attracted to the older vineyards in Napa Valley, and unfortunately there's, for various reasons, disease, production, they've been pulled out. So the 2 oldest producing vineyards I know of in Napa Valley are Canard here in Calistoga, and their vines date back to the 1880s, some of their oldest, and they actually create a separate wine from their oldest vines on the property. And then Crane Assembly, which is owned by Dave Finney, which is just next to the Salvestrin Winery.
Right.
A lot of history there with, yeah.
It's an old name in the valley.
Oh yes,
Yeah, old
yes, yeah.
You know?
Yes, but Silver Oak has done some rather remarkable things in this valley in a relatively short amount of time. So they're, I think, one of only 2, if you count Caldwell, coopers to actually own their own cooperage. And so I took a trip out to the cooperage in Higbee, Missouri, middle of Missouri. Silver Oak also owns their own forest within very short drive of their cooper where they're making the barrels. So they're cutting down the trees, using the lower part of the tree to make the barrels, and then they ship them out here to California. They also have other clients besides their own, but it's fascinating to take a tour of a cooperage and just see what Silver Oak has been able to do in the market that very few wineries have that vertical just effort. Yes, and they source the tiles on the winery from Coffeyville, Kansas.
Right.
For all of you Kansas lovers.
Right. Yeah.
Just random stuff I somehow, yeah.
Well, that whole project was amazing because, I mean, they had gotten flooded and then burned.
And then earthquake.
Right.
Lost some wine in the earthquake in 14.
Yeah.
David Duncan was at the gym when he got a call that the winery was on fire. He followed the fire truck to the winery. Yeah, I can imagine the shock that they, yeah.
This area does disasters really well.
Yes, we do. Fires, earthquakes, floods. We've got that nailed.
Yes, restoration.
Yeah, and people help each other out here.
So.
And that's in the wine industry. That's what also attracted me over the years. Is it's not necessarily like finance or Hollywood or high tech. It's neighbors are helping neighbors get problems with fermentation, stuck fermentation. You need to borrow equipment in some cases. It's just, yeah. I think we still have that.
Oh.
Even though we have so much influx of new ownership in the valley, but there's still a camaraderie in the valley.
True. Well, so where do you see the project going in the future?
I want to visit Screaming Eagle for my number 1,000th.
Oh, let's put that out there.
Yes, let's put that out there. I'm trying to get in there. Been waiting a few months, but eventually we'll see. I'll get a yes or a no.
Yeah.
I want to put together a book on maybe the top properties in the valley or just the history. Tie the project together in a printed format. It would be different than the reviews I have on the website, because the reviews I have now are 1,000 to 6,000 words per winery typically, and it contains information that changes so fast that I like the website because I can edit it on the fly, even though it's extremely difficult to keep track of 800 plus wineries. And so I'm constantly tasting, constantly visiting wine shops, constantly searching the internet, constantly talking to people. When I do tours, I'm often tasting and spitting with clients just to get an idea of updates, and it's just, yeah, the constant updating. So I want to do a book, but it'll contain different information that is more static, because there's a lot of books that come out with tasting notes, and that's a piece of information at one part of time, one part of history. But I'm more interested in the history of the valley and some of the premier properties, and start with that. And photography. I love photography too, so that would tie in.
I've seen a lot of your photos.
Yeah. It's hard to get to know so many people in the valley. There's so many great people in this valley. I wish I could spend more time with them, but The nature of this project is just...
That's the curse of the tour business. You spend a whole bunch of time with great people, but then you
Yes.
don't see them again for a year.
Yeah. And so when I offer my tours, I don't go to the same places.
Smart.
I have my favorites, of course, but I just constantly moving things around, and I'll tie that in with what the customer wants as well.
Right. Now
Types of wines.
you also do a travel website.
Yeah, wow, that's a whole nother life.
Just tell me briefly.
So I started that in 1996. It's called davestravelcorner.com, and that has afforded me the ability to visit the world, and so 170 countries and territories so far, and continuing to travel. And I create content for brands and destinations, tour operators, tourism boards, credit card companies. So they hire me to promote an experience or a region or an activity, and I use social media to help leverage that and then create the content. And it's sort of what I've done with the Napa Wine Project. I've created the content to help leverage tours to a very selective, because people find me through my wine write-ups as well. And then I have writers for my travel site, and so I'll send them all over the world. Tourism boards will reach out to me. They'll offer a fully hosted trip covering airfare, restaurants, hotels, everything in order to get the content. And the writers will then publish either on their own outlets or they'll publish on my website. And I'll promote that via social media as well. And so I have videos, I have a blog, I have contributions from others. It's a very general travel, but it's focused on adventure and outdoors for the most part. And I keep the Napa Wine Project pretty much separate from the travel site, like completely separate. So yeah, and then because the work involved in the Napa Wine Project is so intense, and I'm balancing this other career, I take every winter off and I just try not to think about wine or write about wine, or just take a break. And then when I come back, I find out there's 10 more tasting rooms.
Right, things have changed.
And new things have changed, of course, because that's not going to change. That's the one constant is to change in this business. And so it just gives me a good break and I come back refreshed. And it's worked every year.
Wonderful. It's a good plan.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful plan. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you for sharing this with me.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph.
I used as a resource. Anytime I run into one that I go, where is this place? I bet Dave knows.
Yeah. And I'm continuing to seek out other places I have not yet visited, and there's still plenty, so.
I want to thank Dave Thompson for being our guest. And I would like to thank the Tedeschi Family Winery for being our host during the interview. Something like the Napa Wine Project touches so many people in the industry and beyond. And the fact that Dave has been working on this really as a passion, as a personal interest for so many years is remarkable. And I wish him the best of luck with it. If you'd like to see more of our shows, visit us at winecountryatwork.com.